Good morning, Cathe.
Morning, Nicola.
How are you?
I'm doing good, and it's a sunny day in California.
Right. Well, I said good morning, but it's actually sort of late afternoon here, and it has been a really, really nice day. So I hope you had the same nice day that we've had.
Yeah. Well, this time of year, the weather's in the 60s here.
Right. Okay. I think we're a bit warmer than that at the moment. So it felt very warm. I had to go to my framers twice today. Once to pick up some board, and then I stretched and laced another project, so I took it back to be framed. So it was a long drive.
Cool.
There we are.
I'm going to move the camera back just a sec because I think it's cropped my head off. Oh, yeah, there we go.
That looks good. That looks very good. So,
okay.
Cathe, when I did a video the other day and I was talking about linen, I had an email from Lamora at Access Commodities pointing out to me that there is a product called Linaida. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Linaida.
Yeah.
And it was something that I had never heard of before. So, I sent a few messages out and you responded that you knew exactly what it was. So would you explain to me what Linaida is?
Okay, so there's Linaida is essentially Aida, but regular Aida is woven out of 100% cotton. So it tends to be really stiff in part because of the sizing of 100% linen. So the weave is the same. So you still get the same little blocks that you get in regular Aida, but because the fabric is woven from linen, it behaves slightly differently and it looks a little different.
Right.
It doesn't come in as many colors or as many counts. So both Zweigart and Graziano, which is an Italian company, make Linaida. Graziano makes a 14 and an 18, and Witchelt makes a 14 and a 20. Right. So they make a fairly dense one, and they only make it in like natural and white. But there are a couple of companies who dye it.
Okay, so the equivalent count in linen will be.
So if it's a 14 count Aida, it would be the equivalent, whether it's Linaida or regular Aida, it would be the equivalent of a 28 count linen or Joplin or whatever.
Okay, and the 20 count version is equivalent to 40 count linen.
Would be the same as a 40 count.
Yeah. So Linaida is almost a stepping stone between Aida and linen. It's a compromise between
it is, and even for those people who never make the jump into linen, it still gives them a really great quality product that's not as stiff as normal Aida. And for some projects, if it's fairly densely stitched, it might not matter as much. The other thing that's really nice, so the thing that's nice about it is, so when I pick this up, you can see that it drapes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It hangs on its own. If I do that with a piece of cotton Aida, it doesn't really do that. It just kind of stays really stiff.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that is the sizing, but even if you take the sizing out, it never is quite as, because Linaida has some sizing in it. Right. It just never gets quite as soft as the Linaida does.
Okay, so with Linaida, one of the things that I experience a lot, people write to me saying they'd like to do a Hands Across the Sea Samplers project, but have I got one that's suitable for Aida? Well, that sort of reduces down a lot of samplers because most English schoolgirl samplers tend to have at least the verse cross-stitched over one thread. Now, does that present a problem on Linaida to be able to cross-stitch over one thread?
It does. It does, because just like Aida, because it's woven like blocks, so it's woven like this. So you've got four or more threads woven together rather than a normal weave, which is one-on-one.
Right.
So because of that, so if you take a look at this, see if you can see that. Because it's woven in blocks, you actually have to pierce the square to be able to do the equivalent of over one. Right. It's one of the reasons why partial stitches, whether it's a quarter stitch, which would be the equivalent of over one, or something else is harder to do because you actually have to physically go into the square of the Aida
Yeah.
as opposed to just over a thread of fabric. You can do it,
Right.
but it just takes more effort.
Right. Okay. And what colours does Linaida come in?
The only two colors it comes in other than hand dyed are the sort of off-white. It's an antique white.
Yeah.
This is 14 count Graziano. This is 18 count Graziano.
Right.
So it's basically sort of an off-white. It's not a really bright white. This is 20 count Zweigart. This is raw. So that's the other color comes in. And then this is the 14 count raw.
Right.
So those are the only two colors that the manufacturers make them in. But there is a newish company of a hand dyer, Fiber on a Whim. They actually dye fabrics and threads primarily for the quilting world.
Right.
And a year ago, I asked them to experiment with dyeing counted fabrics. And so they dye Linaida.
Right.
So this is a really nice color, kind of it's actually called spicy mustard because it does kind of look like mustard.
It looks like a lovely
And then
colour.
this is one called cypress. So you can get them dyed, but they're not as common as obviously hand dyed linens or even other kinds of fabrics are.
Okay, but somebody who wanted to dye it at home, it would just handle the same way as other Aida and linen that we're used to dyeing ourselves?
Yeah.
Okay.
It will handle differently because it's linen as opposed to cotton.
Right.
So because it is a natural fiber. So if you're doing like a tea dye or a coffee dye, or even if you're doing a fabric dye and you're doing it on your own, as long as it's something that's suitable for not an animal product like silk, but a natural fiber like cotton or linen, it should dye pretty well. It will dye differently than cotton because they absorb the molecules of the dye differently.
Right.
So if you put a piece of cotton Aida and a piece of linen Aida in the same dye bath together, they won't turn out exactly the same color.
Right.
Close, but not exactly the same.
Okay.
Yeah. But we're starting to pick up more of the hand-dyed one of the linen.
Yeah.
Of the linen Aida, just because there is more people wanting to do projects that, for whether it's a visual problem, a hand problem because they've got maybe arthritis and working on finer counts is really hard.
Yeah.
We've got more people wanting to stitch on nicer quality Linaida and do it in a hand dyed.
Yeah. I always feel the frustration of needle workers when they're not able to stitch on linen, and having access to products. Why do you think people have a problem moving from Aida to linen, and what steps can they take to overcome that?
A couple of things. One is, and you alluded to this in the video you did with your friend, where you were talking about going from 36 to 40 and then to 46 and then to the 53, is that you have to sort of train your eye and your brain to work in tandem.
Yeah.
So just like you learn how to read words or you learn how to read music or you learn how to read anything else, you have to learn how to read fabric.
Yeah.
So if you've only ever stitched with a fabric that's woven out of squares, that's a pretty easy thing to do. The squares are really obvious.
Yeah.
When you're learning how to read fabric to stitch over to, it takes a little while before the brain and the eyeballs finally make the aha moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had that myself. I went from I do a lot of 40 over 1, and I went to doing 46 and 50 to 60. And it took me about 3 nights of stitching it before my brain and my eyeballs could read the fabric and see the holes in the appropriate places without having to count it all the time.
Yeah.
So some of it's that. Some of it is also light. So a lot of people think that the problem is magnification. That might be part of it. More of it is light. So as you get older, particularly past your 40s, the light-dark contrast in your eyes goes.
Yeah.
It gets lesser over time. And that's actually what helps us see the holes in the fabric, is the difference between the fabric and the holes where, in theory, you have a little bit more darkness. It's one reason why a really dense 40 count linen is a lot harder to see than a not as dense 50 count linen. And the denseness is not just the weave, it's the thickness of the individual threads that make up the weave. And so I stitch with the equivalent of a 200 watt light bulb. I actually have a Stella lamp, which is what I use, or I use my daylight halo. And I don't need extra magnification because they're partly built into my glasses. I have the progressives, so I've got the close up to the distance already in them. But I do occasionally, when I'm doing like the 55 count, I do still put my little cheaters on because it gives me just that little extra oomph, but that's pretty much the only time I use them. So I would say the other thing for people who aren't sure about making the leap is check to see if you can stitch in daylight. Take your stitching outside, whether it's a denser count Aida or a linen that you want to move to, take it outside in sunlight. If you can see to stitch it there, then you need better light in wherever it is you normally stitch.
Is there a particularly good brand of linen to try first of all? You know, is there one that you think is a good starter linen?
I think any of the Zweigart linens are. The Witchelt linens are fairly stiff, and the weave of them is a little bit more transparent because the thread in the fabric is thinner. So even though it's a 28 count, it will look a little more open. So if you want stiff and you want really open, try a Witchelt fabric. Try one of the Witchelt linens. Let me grab one real quick.
Okay. I wish I had a linen store like yours.
So that's a 28 count, but you can see it's kind of, you can kind of see through it a little. And the reason is because the individual threads are thinner than they are on a Zweigart fabric. So I would say either Witchelt or Zweigart are good places to start, and both of those, particularly Zweigart, I think in most parts of the world is pretty easy to find. Witchelt certainly is pretty easy to find in the States. It's actually woven, most of it by Parkman, but Witchelt sells it under their brand.
Okay, and of course the colour of the linen, you know, dark linens are harder to see than the lighter ones. So, you know, start with a light coloured linen as well.
And it doesn't need to even be white or off-white. I mean, it could just be sort of a tan kind of color, particularly if you're going to do a sampler. You could do a tannish kind of color. And what I would do then is maybe take a motif from a sampler. You know, you find a sampler you want to stitch, take a motif from that sampler and stitch it on linen to get your brain, your eyeballs, your fingers, the needle, all of that working together. So once you get that aha moment, then you can go, okay, now I can do this.
One of the things at the workshop that I just did for the fire, because she was over 3, one of the big challenges of the workshop was counting 1, 2, 3 for the holes. And for us who've been stitching on linen for some time, you automatically see in groups of 2. And you're right, it's all about training your brain to see.
You've trained your brain to see the over 2, to see the difference between the vertical threads and the horizontal threads in the weave. And now suddenly you're supposed to throw that out the window. The same thing is true for doing Lucy in a different way, because Lucy has so much embroidery in her. For people who do counted work, doing embroidery on a counted linen is a challenge, because it's a lot harder for people to go, oh, gee, I think you mean I have to pierce the thread? You mean I'm not counting? It's always a little bit of a challenge.
That's true. That's very true. I hope that people will try this Linaida as this little bit of a stepping stone, or, you know, certainly try linen, because not that needlework looks better on linen, all needlework is beautiful, but if you can stitch on linen, all of a sudden a whole new world opens up, and you can start doing samplers that have different stitches in. It just flings the doors open of so many projects. And the one thing that I'm really excited about at the moment is that we seem to be having more and more linen that's suitable for counted cross stitch. I told a story on a video a little while ago that when I went into a store, they didn't have linen for a counted cross stitch project.
I saw that part.
But they had linen in the haberdashery section, and they were going to sell me that linen, and that linen was no way right for counted cross stitch. I would never have been able to have counted it out. So I think sometimes you might go into a store and see something that looks cheap, that looks like a bargain, a piece of linen that, you know, that is much cheaper than in a cross-stitch store. But when you get it home, you'll realise that it's not linen to cross-stitch on. So I think it's really important that people want to try linen. They come to a store such as yourselves that specialise in counted work. So,
and if they don't live near a store themselves, there's certainly plenty of brick and mortar shops around the world that are quite happy to help people pick out things. We do that a lot with somebody wants a color, but they don't know what color they want because they can't come in and see it. So our recommendation is pick a DMC color that you want it close to. And then we actually go pick the DMC out of the cabinet and go stand in front of this wall behind me and go, oh yeah, that's kind of close to that color. I think that might be suitable. So, you know, if you find a shop that you want to work with and have them help you along, because that's part of the process for us. We want to keep people stitching, whether it's on linen, whether it's on Aida, whether it's on Tula or Clostern. So the other two fabrics that are woven like Aida are called Tula and Clostern. They're a rayon cotton blend, kind of like a lot of the other even weaves are, but they're woven exactly like Aida, but they're 7 count and 10 count. So for somebody who can't see anymore very well and really needs a big count, there's still fabric to stitch on. So whether you want to stitch on 7 count or you want to stitch on 55 count, it's out there.
It's very exciting at the moment because we seem to be having more and more choices of counts, more and more choices of colours. I really feel that counted work is it's snowballing, and the manufacturers are listening to us. And I think as well that with samplers, reproduction samplers, that, you know, people are dyeing the colours that we want all of a sudden and in the counts that we want. And it's exciting. I just wish that everybody could come on this journey with us. I just wish people would just give it a try. And I also understand that some...
I think that's the important part, is give it a try.
Give it a try, yes. And I understand that some stores do actually have classes for people that want to try stitching on linen. You know, so, you know,
and it's actually there's certainly plenty of YouTube/Flosstube videos out there for somebody who wants to do it in the comfort of their home and isn't quite sure how to read the fabric to be able to go, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. Learning how to do the basics on it is not so much difficult as opposed to, like I said, learning how to read the fabric and also then getting yourself used to working on that particular kind of fabric.
So it's like everything. You can't pick up something and be an expert. You have to put the effort in. And if you're being held back through your eyesight, then you know, think about proper magnification, proper light, and a count that you can see as well, which is important.
The important part is to stitch.
Absolutely.
So whether or not you're going to stitch on, you know, 14 count Linaida, or you're going to stitch on 40 count linen over 1, the important part is to stitch. It's a great way to relax, a great way to reduce stress.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a fun activity. It keeps your brain engaged. All of those things are important, particularly as we get older.
Absolutely. Keeps the dementia at bay, hopefully.
Yes.
And the psychiatrist.
Oh, yeah. And it's way cheaper than the psychiatrist.
Absolutely. Do you know, I actually think that needlework gives us such wonderful value for money. You know, when you think about how much linen and thread and a design cost and the hundreds of hours of entertainment that you can get, it's wonderful. And you have a product at the end of it, which is really, really nice.
And it's very much adjustable to what you want. So whether or not you want to do the colors exactly as they're designed in a contemporary design, or you want to change it, or, you know, like I said earlier, I do a lot of motifs. So I'll take motifs out of samplers.
Yeah.
Even if I eventually decide to stitch the entire sampler.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll just take a small motif and maybe turn it into a piece of jewelry, or I'll turn it into a little ornament or a little key fob, or, you know, whatever, because I like that particular part of the design and I don't have time to stitch the big thing right away.
I love your necklace.
It's
beautiful. I've seen it in real life. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's I'll take it off. So this is actually from a sampler owned by a friend of a friend. It's not a commercial design.
Right.
And it's stitched 40 count over
Can you
one.
move it over just a little bit?
And I did
Could
it
you just
on
slide it-
one of the Graziano
Cathe,
fabrics.
could you just slide it over to your left a little bit more?
Yeah.
A little bit more to your right. Stop. Perfect. That's really, really beautiful. Do you sell the pendants in the store to put them in?
No, because it's all custom.
Right.
So so this is actually the entire thing is actually made. I made the necklace.
Yeah.
I do jewelry work in my. I'm a very crafty woman.
Right.
And then I did the soldering on the necklace. So I do the soldering work for people.
Right.
So people send me stitched pieces that I put under beveled glass. I cut the backing glass, and then I do the soldering work.
Wonderful. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about you that we don't know?
I make them to sell, but
Right.
most of the time I just do the soldering work for people because they have a little motif in a sampler, or they've got.
Yeah.
I have had a couple of people who did gifts for people, very, very special friends of theirs,
Yeah.
and they had me do the soldering work for 5 or 6 things because they were going to give them to their friends for, I think they were Christmas presents, but yeah.
That's just so
And yeah, it's a
lovely.
fun thing to do.
Yeah. You're stitching a motif out of Lucinavia. How are you getting on with that, the tree?
The tree is, so I'm stitching it on, I transferred the design to Graziano Florence, which is a 45 count. You can use it as a counted fabric, but it's the fabric threads are so dense that you can't see through it, so it makes a fabulous embroidery fabric. I have 2 of the leaves done. I have one leaf done. I have the trunk done, and so it's going to take me a while because there's a boatload of French knots in it, and I'm stitching them with SWA 103, so it takes a few more passes to get it as dense as it would if I stitched it with SWA Dolce. But
Yeah.
I happen to really like stitching with SWA 100. So.
Oh, and I do. I absolutely adore it. And I'm going to try Safine. I'm just waiting for something to arrive, and I'm going to sit down and reproduce it. I want to stitch it on the Safine, and I can't wait to try it. Can't wait. Yeah, I like to have a little challenge in each project. So I don't know if it's going to be challenging, but I would imagine it's very beautiful to stitch with.
Well, the other thing I think that's interesting, and what you talked about earlier with the fabrics, is that one of the pushes for us being able to get more denser weave linens now is that there are in fact fabrics to stitch, and there are threads to stitch on those fabrics.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, I didn't know, I knew about SWA 100, but I didn't know about SWA Safine.
Yeah.
And then when Anna Gloriana dyed SWA Safine for 5 of us, we did a club for a couple of years called the Society of SWA Safine. It's a lovely thread to dye, but commercially it's just too time consuming. So that was when she found the base thread for Tudor silk.
Yeah.
So having Tudor silk and SWA Safine means now you've got a pretty good color range for being able to do stuff on denser than 50 count linen.
Mm-hmm.
And that means then that the linen companies are more interested in, making sure that they keep up. They're never going to do it in 20 colors. They're still probably going to do it at maybe 1, but at least then we have the base and can, get it dyed.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, the hand dyeing certainly changes the market quite a bit because of the fact that it gives us way more color options than what we would have if we weren't doing that. So yeah, I think it gives us a lot of really great options.
Yeah, I've just had some linen arrive from the States today, and it's lovely to have several yards of linen.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, sometimes we typically tend to buy a lot of it just in 1 yards because, as you can tell from the fabric that's behind me, there's a lot here.
yeah.
But every now and then I have to buy a lot of something. So when some of the new Graziano, some of the new Legacy linens came out, I had to buy 5 yards of it just because I needed to have it, to be able to touch it and feel it. And, needlework is such a tactile thing. Absolutely. That being able to touch a fabric that's, as you said the other day, a word that you weren't sure you wanted to say on the video, you get a very wonderful sensation out of just doing something that's really smooth, that's really a pleasure to work with, and you pair that with silk threads like Swasserfine or Swan 100, and it's even way more fun.
It is, isn't it? It is, absolutely. So
yes.
I've got some. I'm having a run of band samplers at the moment, and this is where it's lovely to have yards of linen because you're not restricted with the cut for the band samplers. So I'm really excited. I just had a quick peek in the past, and I thought it's linen. So I'm going to investigate that a little bit later on. So what are you working on at the moment, sampler-wise? Are you stitching a sampler?
Actually, I'm working on Lucy.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I've kind of been working on, I've got the border I'm all the way across the top and partway down both sides.
Right.
And so I'm kind of working on that in between working on just the tree on its own piece of fabric at a smaller scale.
Yeah. Lucy actually hangs just here. Let me get it out.
Ah, yes. Oh, it was so much fun to see Lucy when I was at Jean's. I took a bunch of close-up pictures, particularly of the French knots, because I just thought it was such a lovely piece. Yeah. Well, when you showed it to me at Nashville, what really drew me to it was the tree. It's just, there's something about it, the texture, the colors. I like trees and samplers, and so I just thought she was a really lovely piece.
Just trying to find the best way.
Yeah, it's kind of hard because the light tends to bounce off of it.
Yeah, you can see yourself. I love that little lady. I think she's such a sweet little thing.
It's just such a lovely design.
It is. One of my favourite samplers. So they're all my favourites, but she is one of my favourites. So here we are. I recently finished a project, a couple of days ago, and she was meant to be my travelling project. I think you saw her when I was in the States.
Oh, yes.
And I couldn't put her down when I came home. So I've got to go back to my big project now. It's really funny. When I finish a project, I grieve for it almost. It's like, I don't know, you bond so much with these little girls. And I'm finding a problem now going back to my big project.
Yes.
Do you ever have that?
Well, and I'm not a serial stitcher. I can't stitch only one project and then move to the next one. And because I don't just stitch, I do paper crafting and I do beading and I do a whole variety of other things. I tend to bounce between things.
Right. Right.
So sometimes I'll spend several months just stitching and I won't do any of my other hobbies. And then sometimes one day I'll be stitching and the next day I'll be beading and the next day I'll be doing something else. So, yeah.
I sort of like
I'm not sure if it's just that I have a short attention span or just too many things to do.
All throughout the day when I'm working, I sort of savour the thought that in the evening I'm going to sit down with my needle and my project, and it's something that when you're there and you're sort of like scrubbing something or hoovering or doing something you don't really like, you think, this evening I can't wait to sit down with my needle. And it was really funny then, because I finished France's. I sort of haven't got that little thrill, that little nugget of pleasure throughout the day, the evening now.
Well, and you get the satisfaction finishing something. So, and I don't even necessarily mean finishing the entire thing, finishing a section. So I do counted thread work, which technically is sort of counted needlepoint, but it's really more than that. And so a lot of the designs tend to be somewhat geometric. And so it's always really nice when I can get like a section done. I'm working on a large pairing piece where it's a garden with 4 quadrants. And I'm almost done with one of the quadrants. And it just always feels really nice when I get that part done.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, have a good day, Cathe. And
You too.
I look forward to actually sort of linking up with you again on one of my visits to the States. I seem to be there a lot this year.
That'll be great. It's always fun to see you.
All right then. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Bye-bye.
Thanks.